So it looks like Square Enix might possibly go back to making their RPGs turn based, opposed to trying to fit in with making real time action RPGs, because that seems to be like the common trend in gaming nowadays. A lot of video game companies tend to make action RPGs. You don't get, old school traditional turn based RPGs like back in the days, like the 90s or even, the 2000s for the most part. And I mean, you look at turn-based RPGs from the past. I mean, honestly, that's where Square Enix thrived and excelled at, And obviously, a lot of their games were popular on the SNES and on the PS1 back in the day, and even the PS2 for the most part. And as far as Square Enix, focusing on making more turn-based games, this is something that I read about on Insider Gaming, and I believe that this is because of the success of Clair Obscure Expedition 33, which came out this past year in 2024. That game actually did way better than people had expected, because I think it did like 3.3 million copies in sales since its release. And and I don't know. I feel like you look at that game and you look at Final Fantasy 16, which is not a turn-based RPG. It's more of an action adventure type. I feel like I feel like more people are interested in the Expedition 33 game than they are with Final Fantasy 16, because I hardly hear anyone talking about Final Fantasy 16 anymore. It seemed like it was in the limelight for a minute, and then I don't know, you just stop hearing about it. And in terms of sales, I don't know if it has done more than like the ballpark of like 3 mil or what have you. But you look at Final Fantasy in general, it's a name that's been around for about 3 decades. And honestly, like whenever Square Enix drops a new Final Fantasy game, it should be selling millions and millions. Okay. It should be selling roughly like around or under like 10 mil, but I don't feel like I don't think Final Fantasy has the aura that it once had back in the day. And you even look at games like Dragon Quest, like Dragon Quest 11, I think came out a couple of years ago. That's a game that did like 8.5 million in terms of sales, and lo and behold, it just so happened to be a turn-based RPG. I feel like the last proper turn-based RPG game that we got in the Final Fantasy franchise was Final Fantasy 12. Now, Final Fantasy 12 came out in the mid 2000s. I think it was like 2006. Final Fantasy 13 Part 1 from 2009, I believe. That was a game that a lot of people did not like, because they didn't like the fact that you controlled one character and then you had a party, but you couldn't control any of the other party members. And I feel like that's something that people still blast Final Fantasy 13 on for this day, or to this day for that matter. And I feel like for the most part, I feel like after Final Fantasy 13, Square Enix had given up on the turn-based RPG formula for that franchise. And don't get me wrong, 15 was good, but a lot of people look back at it now and feel like it's overrated. It's something that was a big deal when it came out, but I don't know. Better RPG games have come out since then, like Persona. And speaking of Persona in the series, um, I feel like for the most part, Atlas has gotten it right with the Persona games within the past couple of years or so. Um, I feel like Persona 3 through 5 were all, great games. Persona 5, I believe, came out back in 2016. And I think that was the same year Final Fantasy 15 came out. I feel like, Persona 5 easily overshadowed Final Fantasy 15 for the most part, because of everything, like the aesthetics, the gameplay, all that stuff. I feel like for the most part, like, Atlas could and Sega could produce like better RPGs that can capture your attention. I'm not discrediting Square Enix or anything like that, because I know they're capable of putting out good games. But you look at some of the games that they have put out within the past couple of years that were RPGs, like Triangle Strategy from 2022, Octopath Traveler 2 from 2023. those were all like pretty good games, but at the same time, they didn't attract the type of mainstream attention that some of the other RPGs did. And and I feel like Square Enix, for the most part, has been going back into the past, and they've been trying to make revenue off of their old titles, which is one of the reasons why we got the Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D remake. You know, that's one of the reasons why Square Enix keeps going back to Final Fantasy 7 and doing remakes or making sequels and stuff like that, because it seemed like a lot of new stuff that they try to come out with, it's not really connecting or registering with casuals, and it's something that you see in the result of lost revenue. And I think, back in 2023, they had lost like $2 billion in terms of like revenue. And and yeah, I mean, there's been obvious signs that Square Enix has been struggling, financially, and there have been a lot of speculations on what steps are they going to take to try and improve things in terms of making their games more successful and trying to reach out to casuals in general. But the thing is, you got to realize that, like in the future, we're supposed to be getting a new Dragon Quest game, and honestly, I feel like Dragon Quest 12, it can't be a flop. It can't be a failure. But the thing is, it seemed like it's a game that's kind of going in the same direction that Final Fantasy 16 did, because I think there had been rumors that it's supposed to be M rated. And that's what happened with Final Fantasy 16, despite like all the other games prior to Final Fantasy 15 within the franchise being like T rated or whatever. Um, I don't think like the rating for Final Fantasy 16 is what hurt it. I think it was just a lack of interest, and I think Square Enix has strayed too far away from what made them popular. Because back in the day, Final Fantasy games were turn-based RPGs that had larger than life characters, beautiful world designs, and simplistic storytelling. And I don't know. I feel like Square Enix with their RPGs nowadays are trying too hard to be like other video games, opposed to trying to have its own identity and trying to maintain it. And if they're not doing that, they're basically remaking older games, which there's nothing wrong with that. But at some point, the well's going to run dry. But yeah, I mean, I do feel like focusing on turn-based RPGs is something that could help Square Enix in the future. And and yeah, I mean, I honestly feel like for the most part, it's something that would make them stand out. Having, more turn-based, I guess, E-rated or T-rated RPGs on like the Switch 2 is something that could be really helpful, because it's been proven that, Square Enix could take their RPGs, they can, sell on the Nintendo. They would be attractions on the Nintendo Switch or what have you. But it's one of those things where, it's kind of dicey, because the landscape of gaming has changed a lot. And you have a lot of third-party games that are going to appear on the Switch 2 in the future. So those are games that could potentially overshadow anything that Square Enix decides to bring to the Switch 2, especially with games like um, Cyberpunk 2077, which is a big one. And I believe we're supposed to be getting Final Fantasy VII Remake on the Switch too, and I doubt it'll do pretty decent on that. But I don't know. I don't see it, outselling like Cyberpunk or anything like that. But but yeah, I do feel like Square Enix should probably consider making Final Fantasy 17 a turn-based RPG, and I don't know, maybe making it T-rated wouldn't hurt, but I don't know, like I don't know, just seeing a M-rated Final Fantasy game is kind of weird for the most part, but if it's something they want to do, they're going to do it, and that's just that. But yeah, I do feel that for the most part, Square Enix needs to have their own identity when it comes to RPGs, and I honestly think they should really think, in terms of like, who are they trying to cater to, and what are they going to do to make their game stand out from every other title that they've put out within the past couple of years? Because there's nothing wrong with having variety within the gaming world, because nowadays it seems like a lot of video game companies and developers. Um, it seemed like they're all trying to fit in and they all make the same game that's slightly different and no one really cares about, that's hollow. And it's something that people would say it's great and it's one of the best games ever, but then after a year people forget about it. And video games should not be like that. Back in the day, we had memorable video games that would stand the test of time and people would talk about it a decade later or 20 years later or what have you. And I honestly feel like Square Enix should go back to trying to put out games that would stand the test of time in the long run.